All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I would like to welcome you all to the Downright Capable Show. My name is Brian Herndon, and I'm here with my co-host, Marla Marasco. If you're watching this on the replay, you can still make comments, and we would love it if you would share our show as well. Most of you have probably, and most of us have probably had your end of the year IEP meetings to prepare for next year already. But we'd like to go ahead and talk about IEPs today on our show. It's our hope that as you walk away from today's show that you feel empowered to speak up and to speak out during your child's IEP meeting, and that you feel confident in your knowledge of what should be happening. Marla?
Yes. Hold on one second, Brian. I'm actually just making sure that this is on our page because I'm not seeing it. So
give me technical difficulties.
Yeah, give me a second here because I'm not seeing this on our page. So
I am seeing it on Facebook.
You are?
I did, yes.
Okay. Okay, I think we're live, guys. Okay, sorry about that. Don't you just love technology? And I really wasn't listening to you, Brian. I'm usually a good multitasker, but you said Marla, and I was like looking on my.
Well, what we're doing is we're talking about IEPs today, and our goal is that parents walk away feeling empowered, that they can speak up and speak out at their IEP meetings, and that they know what should be happening.
Right. And yes, I'm excited about this topic. It's kind of come full circle for me because we started this, I guess 9 months ago, back in August. And, you know, I was sitting out here in my sunroom and I'm sitting out here for the last show. So it's kind of come full circle for me. But so like Brian said, this is our last show of the school year, kind of like of this, the TV season, we want to say. We're going to take some time off. We're going to enjoy our families for the summer. But I encourage you that if you have not checked notifications on this Facebook page, to check it, because we will be checking in, time and time again throughout the summer. We may do some surveys. We may just post some things just to stay live in the Facebook feed. So I encourage you to click notifications so that you can stay up to date. And we will be starting our second season of the Downright Capable Talk Show come August. We haven't solidified a date yet, so that's why we're just saying to click off notifications. And we are excited to hit this again next school year, but just wanted to end this with IEPs. So yeah, let's hit the show, Brian.
Well, just to kind of bounce off of what you said there, I've really enjoyed this show with Marla, and I hope that those of you who've been able to watch and listen and catch our shows have found it informative and helpful. And that's our goal is to kind of change the perception of how people view Down syndrome. And I think we're doing that, Marla.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, we had this vision, I guess back in May of last year, where we talked about trying to change the way society looks at individuals with Down syndrome and look at their capabilities first before they see their disabilities. And like you said, we hope that this show has empowered you as parents to become the advocates for your kids, whether you're at school, whether you're out in the community, or maybe they're at their jobs. Help empower you to be their voice so that someday they can then be their own self-advocate. So yeah, we hope this show has empowered you, and we look forward to our next season, hopefully with some more speakers. And again, as always, if there's any specific topic that you guys want to talk about, please make sure you let us know in the comments.
Absolutely. Well, Marla, maybe as I'm talking a little bit, you can figure out how to share our show with the new link, since we're having technical difficulties. I don't know.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
So anyway, I just wanted to share, I've been an elementary school teacher, early childhood special education principal, as well as an elementary school principal, a special education advocate, and a parent of a child with disabilities. And all of that combined, I've literally been in hundreds of IEP meetings in various capacities. And I'm so glad that we're talking about this topic today, because one of the things that I see during IEP meetings is that parents don't feel like they have a voice. Right. And the IEP, you sit down in that meeting and you do your introductions, and then you go into the present level of academic and functional performance. And you kind of talk about that. You might, kind of talk about how the child's doing on their goals. And then they come to that part in the meeting where they say, Mom, Dad, what are your concerns for your child's education? And this is supposed to be where you have your parent participation piece. But in my opinion, it seems so small when you think about you're only sharing your concerns. Right. Because part of IDEA is that parents should have an equal voice at the table. Yeah, and I think we're both passionate about that.
Yeah.
And so what my wife and I will do is we'll often share our concerns, of course, about Nate's education, and then we go into sharing our hopes and our dreams about his future. He's only 10 years old. He'll be 11 this summer, and he will eventually start to weigh in on that. But right now, his mother and I are the ones who kind of lead that charge. And after I share our hopes and dreams, I usually end with a statement, something like, everything we do in this IEP meeting should be leading us toward these end goals.
Absolutely.
So I would think, as a strong proponent of inclusive education, I also make sure to put in the hopes and dreams speech that our goal is that he is educated alongside his peers in the general education classroom, and that he has full access to the general education curriculum. So I just put it all out there on the table at the very beginning of the meeting so that there's no question about where I stand and where his mother stands as far as what we want for our son.
Right.
And so it's our desire that, just as we are talking about Nate's goals for the school year, that we keep in mind those hopes and dreams, and that we share, that his mother and I share for him for his future. And so, so I would just encourage you, as you're thinking about your child's IEP, write a vision statement for your child. Right. I think we've talked about that in one of our shows.
We did.
Yeah, present that at the beginning. Require that to be part of the IEP, because if you move or if you get new staff, that needs to be there to follow your child.
Right, and along with that, Brian, it's updating that vision statement every year, because things are going to change. Your child is going to grow. Your vision, maybe their vision, once they are able to chime in on what they see for their future, that's going to change as your child is getting older. So make sure that you update that annually, and that the IEP team puts that in the IEP.
Absolutely. And, we were talking the other day, and so just thinking about that vision statement or those hopes and dreams. And Marla and I were chatting the other day, and I had talked about backward planning. And this is something that when I was a school principal, we focused on data all the time. We're constantly monitoring data for the school, data for the teachers, data for the students. And so if you think about it, and I know, Marla, you had brought up with me the other day something called design, which is kind of backwards planning. So you think about the end goal in mind. And so if we think about our child who has an IEP, we want to think about, what does he or she look like at 25 years old? Well, maybe 22 when they're done with schooling. But what does that look like for your child? And then maybe backwards plan from there. Backwards plan all the way down to preschool if you have to. Right. But every decision you make in your child's IEP should lead toward that ultimate vision of who you'd like to see that person become. And so I just think it's important to do that. And Marla and I had even kind of talked about maybe, calling a meeting that's not really an IEP meeting, but just a planning meeting, if you will, for sharing that vision and maybe breaking out, those steps to achieve that vision. I haven't personally done that because we haven't had the need to do that, but I have certainly at times kind of taken charge of the IEP meeting, which gets kind of awkward when the parent takes charge. But when I feel that the meeting is wandering down a road that I'm not really comfortable with, or that we don't think is going to get Nate to that end goal, I certainly am willing to jump in and kind of start to redirect the conversation.
Right. And to your point, I mean, what I want parents to understand too is that with that vision statement, it doesn't have to strictly be academic in nature.
Right.
So, you want them to attend, after school extracurricular activities, after school. You see them going on to the prom or field trips. I mean, be very clear on that, because again, from a backwards planning perspective, they know when those things are coming up. Those are scheduled dates, right? A field trip is coming up. What does it look like? Well, yeah, one would hope. What does it look like to get your child involved in that field trip? Are there things that need to, maybe it's, your child is nervous about being out in the community, or loud sounds, all the different things that we think about in school. That also has to be thought out very carefully when they attend events like outside of school. If they want them to do job, like all that needs to be planned out and really carefully thought out, because if it's not, then it's not going to be done successfully. So that's that 5-year plan. However, for me, it's 5 years, however it is for your child, but for me, it's like 5 years. So I'm looking 5 years down the road. What does that look like for Jacob? I want him to be able to go on to school. I want him to have a productive job in the community. I want him to learn to be able to get to a job successfully, independently. So what does that look like now for him to be able to be successful in 5 years?
Absolutely. Well, and to your point, Marla, I was looking at the, I think it's the inclusion, one of the inclusion pages for Down syndrome.
Yeah.
And this mom had posted a picture of her daughter, and her daughter was standing over, it looked like maybe a countertop area, just hanging out with other teenagers. I think they may have been on vacation on a cruise or something.
Okay.
And it was the teen room. And she said, no matter how hard this fight has been to include my daughter in the regular classroom, she said, when I look over right now and I see her standing there hanging out with other teenagers in the teen room.
So worth it.
Because she didn't know any different. She just went and was a part of everything that was happening. And I think about that's what inclusion is about. It's about it's not like we talked about. It's not always just being in the classroom, because you can be in the classroom and not really be included. But It's about what happens when you are in the classroom. Are you meaningfully included? Are you valued? Are you valuable? And this girl, she walked over and she just went up to the counter and, maybe ordering a Coke. I don't know what she was doing, but that was very normal to her.
Yeah,
and
sure.
It should be, and so just thinking about, those 5 years, 10 years down the road, what do you want Jacob to be doing? What do I want Nate to be doing? Yeah. Do we want him to just go up to a group of friends and just be a part of that and feel like that's a normal thing?
Right. And to your point on that, and that is, I think what's important too is, and I encourage, we're speaking about IEPs, but I encourage those parents, if I said this the other day, if your school year has not ended, try to get in to see observations if you have not done that yet. I think that is imperative, because along with the data that you just talked about, Brian, you have to see how that class is being run, who's running the class, how your child is in that classroom, because that's the only way, to your point, you're going to be an informed, productive member of that IEP team if you actually see yourself what's taking place. So I did do that yesterday, even though, again, we have like one more month of school. But my point to that is, from an inclusion perspective, is when Jacob left to go to his next class, the kids didn't know who I was. And I was tickled pink, because this is all I heard. Hey, Jacob, high-fiving in the hallway. Hey, buddy, what's up? How you doing, Jacob? And I just sat there with this big smile on my face. How important is that alone? Yes, the academics, of course, are important, but how important is that social piece to be able to walk down the hallway and get high fives from your peers? Absolutely. Super important. That's a hard thing to, just, get that in life. And I just thought to myself, geez, if he was not, and I understand that inclusion works, and it may not be some things that people want for their children. It's strictly independent, right? But that is a big piece for me, as it is for you, Brian, is being a part of that community. Again, whether it's in the school or outside, just in your local neighborhood, being seen, being heard, being valued. And to me, that was so important to see him walking down by himself, getting the high fives from his friends and being acknowledged. I mean, that was just like, I walked away so happy.
Yeah, it does. It warms your heart as a parent, and that's what we all want. We want our kids to feel like they're a part of rather than apart from.
Yeah.
So,
and I know we were talking about least restrictive environment the other day, you know?
Yeah, we were. And so that is one of the things, thinking about the IEP meeting. And, I said, sometimes I will just jump in and kind of lead that meeting if I feel like the meeting is going down a road that I'm not real comfortable with.
Yeah.
And so one of the ways I do that is I kind of share, those hopes and dreams. And then I'll say, all right, now let's talk about what we need to do based upon our hopes and dreams for our son. And let's consider the present level of academic and functional performance. And let's create goals that are going to help Nate get to this end. I even brought charts to the meeting where we have the goals listed, down the left. And my signs, right? But the goals listed down on the left side, and the time of day listed across the top.
That's awesome.
So when you think about that least restrictive environment consideration conversation, you look at those goals. So you've looked at the goals, or you've looked at that vision for where your child is going to be 5, 10, 15 years down the road. And you're creating goals that are going to hopefully get your child to that place. And then look across the time of day. So, my son is just finished up with elementary school. He's going to intermediate school this next year. So we might look at a goal of, working on his, I go back to math facts because it's just an easy goal, but working on his math facts. Then we're going to look across the time of day and go, oh, that would make sense to work on during math class. And so then we say, let's work on that goal, during math class. And then you have a real honest conversation about how to provide that service in the general education classroom.
Yeah, no, that actually sounds like an awesome idea. I've never really thought about doing that, but I mean, we're all visual people, so it's something that, they can literally take that chart with them for when they're actually planning,
Yeah. And so, and of course that happens, that conversation about how to provide the services in the general education classroom happens toward the end of the IEP. That should not happen. It happens after the goal has been established and after the amount of minutes needed to meet that goal is established, because you don't want the amount of minutes to be dictated by where the goal is going to be worked on. Correct. And so when I look at the law, when I look at IDEA, it says the least restrictive environment principle says, to the maximum extent appropriate, with non-disabled peers, or that the children should be educated to the maximum extent appropriate with non-disabled peers, and that special education students are not removed from regular classes unless those goals cannot be met even with the use of supplementary aids and services, and unless the education in regular classes cannot be achieved satisfactorily with the use of supplementary aids and services. So I've been seeing on Facebook, and it just breaks my heart, honestly, is so many families are just expressing their frustration with the school district because in their IEP meetings, the team has come back and said, we think your child would be better served in a more restrictive placement. And time and time again, the parents are saying, but my child has been making progress on his or her goals. Well, it doesn't make sense to change placement at that point, because if they're making progress with the use of supplementary aids and services, the law says they should not be removed from regular classes. It's very clear. And so I will just say to the team, let's have a conversation about each of these goals And let's talk about how we can provide those services in the general education environment with the use or with the appropriate supplementary aids and services. And then we talk about what those aids and services will be.
Right. And it's even, I even go back to the fact of like, I want to know why they feel that way. Like why, because again, to your point of the data, if the data is showing that progress, why do you now feel that this alternative classroom or this alternative placement is necessary? Like, I want to hear from them too, because it kind of puts them in they're back to the wall. Like, you're showing us this data, but yet you're coming to the table with this. This doesn't make sense.
Right.
Explain this to me.
Yeah. And that's something that I think is so important as well when you think about IEP meetings, is that if the team has come to a decision that is vastly different than what you as a parent had envisioned for your child, then you all are probably not looking at the same data.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to get that data.
Absolutely. And so if the team comes and you've looked at the present level, you've established goals, you've established the time it's going to take to meet those goals, and then the team says, we think your child will be better served in a more restrictive placement in order to meet these goals, I think it's important for you as a parent to say, how did you come to this conclusion?
Exactly.
What data did you use to support this decision? Going back to that least restrictive environment principle that says that children will not be removed from the general education class unless the education cannot be achieved satisfactorily, even with the use of supplementary aids and services. So I would even challenge parents to say, what supplementary aids and services have you provided to my child in the general education environment or in the current environment, and why did it not work? What else did you try? What data do you have to show that it was not working?
And I think that also goes to my point of the observation, Brian, is, now you have data, you have an observation. So you should be able to come to that meeting fully informed. And to Brian's point is, if they're coming out of left field with something totally different, whoa, this isn't what we thought. Then explain to me, just like you're saying, Brian.
Well, in my opinion, it is a violation of the principle of parent participation, which is part of IDEA. You are an equal member of that team. And if you are an equal member of that team, then you should have the same information that the other team members have to make decisions on your child. And if you don't have that data, you need to ask for it and require it before any decisions are made. Go ahead.
Right. And to that point, Brian, is especially because I know this happened to me. I mean, my son is 13 years old, so we're all nervous when we're first starting to get into the school system, and they kind of make you feel like you have to sign stuff before you leave this room. Like they're shoving it in your face, and it's like, I ain't signing nothing. I'm not, especially now that my son is older. My IEP is getting a little bit thicker. You know what I mean? And so I hope that parents know, if there's one thing that you do take away from this conversation, is you do not have to sign anything.
No, you don't.
You are allowed to walk away from that meeting and look at the data and look at everything that's being spelled out. And if you have, what is the time period, Brian? Is it 10 days?
My understanding is it's 10 days, but I saw someone on Facebook reply that in their state they had less time.
I think it does go by state too. I can't definitively say, and I don't want to say, so you might need to know that what's specific in your state, but I want you to know that you don't have to sign anything.
No. And you as a parent have the right to take that information home and digest it, consider it. Now, keep in mind that whatever the time frame is, the day after that time frame, they can implement that IEP. In my state, that was the case. It may be different in different states, but where I was in Missouri, and I'm in Arkansas now, and I haven't figured out all the nuances here. But in Missouri, we had a 10-day period for parents to consider the proposed IEP. And then if after 10 days, they did not sign or did not come back and say that they disagree. Then on day 11, it went into effect.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so that is something to really check into with your own state and see if that's what happens.
Yeah.
But I like your point, Marla. The other day, and our IEP team, I'm very happy with it here in Arkansas so far. But they gave us a tremendous amount of data at the most recent meeting, and then they said, and they kind of went through it fairly quickly, which is normal. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, there's so much of it.
Yeah, you have, this hour, maybe two scheduled, and you got a lot to get done. And so they give us all this data, and they said, well, what do you think? And I looked at her and I said,
That's
well,
nice.
I said, and honestly, like I said, I like our team, and I really respect the person who said this. And I just said to her, I said, well, you've given me a lot of information, and I've had very short time to digest it. You guys have had more time to digest it, so I need a little more time to form an opinion.
Absolutely, and that's fair. I mean, if the situation was reversed, they would be doing the same thing. So that's absolutely a fair statement.
Absolutely. So just to want to encourage the parents who are in those meetings that you don't have to sign the document. You can take that home. You can consider the proposal. And like I said, if they have come to a very different conclusion than you have, then ask for the same data. Because, Marley, if you and I, we're both educated, reasonable people. If we look at the data and the data shows trend lines up or trend lines down, we should probably come to relatively the same conclusion.
Sure.
If the trend line is going up and it's a good thing, we're not talking about behavior, but we're talking about maybe, academic progress, then we would say, hey, what's happening is working. Let's continue that. But if the trend line is going down, meaning that the child is not learning and is struggling, we would both look at that and go, hey, this is not working.
Right.
What do we need to do differently?
What happened? Right. I mean, that's normal. I mean, you want to know, because if it's not working, we need to fix it. Obviously, if it's not, don't fix it. But if it's broken, let's fix it.
Right. Absolutely. And so just, encourage parents that, as you're in those meetings, ask for the same data, because you're all educated people. And when I say that, it doesn't mean that everyone has a college degree, but everyone in that room is educated on that child, and you as a parent are the expert on your child. And so, you have the right to take that information and consider it and have a genuine conversation with them about how to meet the needs in the least restrictive environment.
Right.
And I think that's something that a lot of, like I said at the beginning of the show today, I've literally sat through hundreds of IEP meetings, and I can count probably not even on two hands the number of IEP meetings that I've been to where we had a genuine conversation about how to provide the services for each of those goals in the general classroom as a first line of discussion. Overwhelmingly, it was, all right, here's the goal, here's the number of minutes that we think it's going to take to do this. And based on the number of minutes, this is the placement for the child, because they automatically assume pullout for those minutes.
Right.
And there was never a discussion about it.
And that's the thing, Brian. I mean, I know, again, when I first started in the journey of having Jacob in public education, it was pull out, right? That's all you ever heard. And I think we even talked about this back in one of our other shows about push in. I don't be afraid to ask that. I asked that at one of my IEP meetings, and they looked at me like I had five heads, like, what? Push in? What do you mean? And I'm like, well, what do you mean? What do I mean? I'm like, what? Like, so
Why? Right.
It's just, don't be afraid to ask those questions. I mean, it's probably not that they didn't know what I was talking about. They were surprised that I asked. Right. And I think that's took them, they were caught off guard on that. But that's the point, is at the end of the day, you're trying to do the best thing for your child. And, if your child can work effectively in that environment, why not?
Yeah.
If it, so I have it in my son's IEP in the service grid, push in. Now,
Yep.
that's like 30 minutes. But then there's 2 other sessions that's pull out for speech.
Yep.
And that has to be that way. And I understand that. But the point is, we came to a middle ground. We heard each other. And you know what, let's see what happens when we push it in. Science, we're in social studies, we've got some big words going on here, and so it's been working great. And actually, what's so nice about it is that my son has, they called it an elder tea project. And it's this big project, literally, they've been working on all year. They pick an elder from their family. I think it's funny, elder. Anyway, a elder person in our family, and then they do a whole project about it, the history of when that person was born. The science. There's a whole bunch of. There's a whole thing about it. But the point was, this speech teacher has pushed in ELA, for instance. And my son is practicing the speech. So he's practicing it one-on-one with her. They're standing up, they're articulating, and then he's practicing it in front of his group, his peers, which is ideal because, again, a lot of people don't like public speaking.
Right.
So that is helping him hone his public speaking. So, again, he can be a self-advocate. But, again, if I didn't ask for that push in, that probably never would have happened.
No, he probably wouldn't have even have had access to doing that project if you hadn't been pushing for.
Probably not.
Right.
Probably not. So, and that's my whole point. Don't be afraid to ask. I mean, if it's part of the curriculum, it's part of the curriculum. And with modifications and accommodations, we can figure out how to get your child to be a part of that project or that group discussion or something.
A little story on Nate. When he was in 3rd grade, we had his IEP meeting at the beginning of the school year, and this was right before school was starting, and we had gone through all the goals and all the minutes, and I said, the special ed director and I did not get along very well there, but I said, well, now we need to talk about where those services are going to be provided. And she looked at me and she said, yeah, I suppose we do. And I said, all right, so let's start talking about those. So I went back to every single goal and we talked about them. And I remember getting to the reading goal.
Yes, that reading goal.
I remember saying, hey, he should have access to reading groups and the reading instruction in the regular classroom. And why couldn't, his special ed teacher push in for those services? Right. And the special ed director kept coming back with, well, that's not when we do reading. Right. And I said, but we're talking about an individualized education program. We're not talking about a system, a school schedule.
School-wide, it's called individual.
Right. And he kept coming back. And the principal had actually stepped out for just a minute. And when he came back in, he kind of heard this discussion. And I was so proud of him. He said, well, I guess we'll just have to look at the schedule and make different plans.
Absolutely.
And I wanted to jump across the table and give him a big hug. and you could just see it. She was so angry. Yeah. I mean, she quit talking. She quit talking at that point, and I was glad because she kept leading our meetings and really had no business leading the meeting. Yeah. But
well, you challenged her. You put her in a position that wasn't the norm, right? Right. Yeah. And you emphasize the fact that this was an individual education plan. Yep. I'm here for my son. I'm not worried about all the rest of the students in the classroom. And, that's you need to do that. That's what you need to do as an advocate. That's why I said, don't be afraid to ask the questions. Don't be afraid to come in with ideas because you are a member of that IEP team. You're not just there as a guest,
And I've even had times where the special ed director or even the special ed teacher would say, well, I have so many other kids on my caseload or whatever. And I'd say, well, that's fantastic. But we're not here to talk about those kids. We're here to talk about my child. So let's go back to talking about my child. And you just have to know that you direct that conversation back to your child. You direct that conversation back to the goals. You direct that conversation back to how those goals are going to meet or to help your child get to that vision that you have for your child. And you just keep going back to that. You ask for the data.
Yeah.
You have a real and honest conversation about providing services in the general education classroom first with the use of supplementary aids and services. And if the school district hesitates or balks at that, then you ask for the data that shows it was not working, because the least restrictive environment principle says that children are not to be removed from the general education classroom unless they cannot receive an appropriate or an appropriate education, even with the use of supplementary aids and services.
Right. And, you know, Brian, could you actually, because I know you and I talked about this a little bit, and I just want to make sure, again, I think I'm probably directing this a little bit more towards the new parents who are in the mix. But again, I mean, every little piece of information is helpful no matter where you are in your journey. But you had mentioned something to me when we were talking the other day about getting professional education or professional developments written into the IEP for the personnel that is the staff that is going to be working with your child. I mean, can you talk a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. And so you think about, you have the goals, you have the time, you've talked about, what the supplementary aids and services are, to support that child. And then there's sometimes a piece, or there's always a piece, and it depends on how your state words it, but kind of it's a section that talks about, what does the staff need in order to make this IEP happen? And different states, different districts will call it different things.
Thread, yeah.
Right. But yeah, absolutely. So if your child is going to be in the classroom and maybe in a general education classroom, and that general education teacher has never done any modifications for a child with special needs, well, first of all, that teacher needs to speak up and say something.
You would hope.
But at that point, then you can put professional development in the IEP to help that teacher know what it is he or she needs to do in order to help your child in that classroom. So that could be going to a training on modifications and accommodations in the classroom. If the child is in the classroom and the team has decided to use a certain program, a certain reading program, or math program, then you want to make sure that the child, or that the child's team, that the people who use that program are trained on that program.
Yeah, or certified in some capacity.
Absolutely. If the team has never worked with someone with Down syndrome, and the teacher says, I've never had a child with Down syndrome in my class, and I'm not really sure, what that looks like. Connect with your local Down syndrome association and provide training through that. So you can absolutely have training written into the IEP. Now, what you as a parent cannot do is dictate where that training is, what the training is, how it happens.
But you can offer them suggestions. I know I'm like, hey, just so you know, the local, Down syndrome organization has this educator forum coming up on this date, just throwing it out there.
Absolutely. Yeah. And as parents, we can't dictate curriculum. We can't, well, my kid learns better with this reading program and not that reading program. You can say that, but you don't really have any say as far as what the district chooses to do to meet those goals. So that really is a building choice, a principal and educator choice. But you can absolutely have professional development written into the IEP to support your child, to support the people who work with your child in order to help him or her meet those goals.
Yeah, let me just give you an example. So I don't know if Nate's doing extended school year. I don't know. Jacob is. And, they sent home the other day, like that service grid, if you will, like how many minutes he's getting certain things. And I sat there and I thought to myself, well, this doesn't make sense. Like, why would we have ELA for a full hour and reading intervention for a half hour?
Right.
to me, like, let's take that time to really focus in on the areas that he needs the most help on. I mean, I'm not, I was like, well, can we change those minutes so that he's getting an hour of reading and maybe half an hour of ELA? Because again, I don't really know what the actual plan is for ELA. I do know what the goal is for reading. So let's take that and switch that up. And they were like, yeah, that's fine. Yeah,
absolutely. Absolutely. You can offer those suggestions. You can, because I mean, everyone's human and everyone's going to make a mistake, and they're going to say, let's do an hour for ELA and 30 minutes for reading, and go, well, but wait a minute, this doesn't make sense. And so speak up and say something. I'm glad you did, Marla.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing is too, I mean, again, I don't know if Nate has summer reading, but last year, Jacob had a summer reading book, and he does this year as well. And it's a requirement. And I brought that up. Now, I think I remember I told you that I have in my IEP written monthly parent consult meetings. So I meet with them once a month. And that's been written in my IEP since day one. So, so I asked that, we have one more month of school. What's the planning going to look like now? So last day of school, he has his modified version of the summer reading, right? And they're like, oh yeah, we need to think about that, and it's like, I mean, I know they're in the mode of feeling, let's get through the end of school. But in my mind, I'm like, well, that's like tomorrow. And now you're going to like throw this reading book on us. And I want to know what it looks like. I want to know what the modified version is so we can hit the ground running when school ends. And I'm not scrambling the last week to try to find some modified version out there on the web. I want them to come back and thoughtfully have planned out what that looks like for him. They've been doing a really good job this year with modifying the work. So I just kind of threw that in there. Hey, you know what? Just make sure we have that modified summer reading book. And they're like, oh yeah,
Yeah. Well, and there's, and I'm not very knowledgeable about this, but there's a lot of websites out there that can help with that. I know I have to give a shout out to my son's fourth grade reading teacher. He read some, I'm going to forget the names of the books right now, but Hatchet. And then Brian's Return or something like that, I don't remember, which are pretty high level books. But his fourth grade reading teacher essentially rewrote the books. Not just for him. She had a couple of kids in her class that were lower level readers, but she rewrote the books and then put them through or submitted them on a website where it could kind of level the text.
Oh, cool.
And so then she knew that she was writing at a level that would be appropriate for those kids. And I just have to give her a shout out because that's
actually a really interesting. Find out the program.
But she, she's a regular education teacher. She said it honestly didn't take her that long.
She's probably read the book. She probably has her clip notes somewhere. So
absolutely.
That's content that somewhere down the line can be repurposed for somebody, to your point. So, although it was, your son needed it, that doesn't mean that there's not some child coming up behind him that they could just be like, oh yeah, we have that, and bring that back out. And I think that's what's so important is that you don't have to recreate the wheel.
No.
And that's what I think sometimes, especially the younger kids coming in, the younger teachers, they're like, oh, I'm going to make this all pretty and redo it. But sometimes you really don't need to do that because there are actually modifications already done, especially in that instance where there's a book that is, part of the reading and probably was already modified in some capacity. I like the idea that she put that into the software to make it level set the reading. I actually think that's a really great idea. But again, the point is ask those questions because you do not want to get caught on the last day of school, because guess what? Those teachers are gone. You ain't getting them. They're contract employees. They are gone. They are not coming back until August 15th or whatever. And so you're not
Yeah.
So I mean, just kind of think about that, especially as you're getting into the sixth, seventh, and eighth grades, that now we have summer reading, and when you're in the younger grades, that's probably not the case, but
Right.
this was new to me last year. That was my first question this time. You got the summer reading?
Yeah. Yeah. And just, I hear, and I think different states are different, but the states that I've been associated with, modifications and accommodations are not reasons to pull children out of the classroom.
Not at all.
According to IDEA. So when your district comes back and says that, that because of the modifications and accommodations, this is so much of a different curriculum, this is so much of whatever, that's not necessarily what the law says. It says that if your child cannot receive an appropriate education with the use of supplementary aids and services, then they would be removed. And so read up on some of those principles found in IDEA, understand how they are implemented, and hold to your guns on that stuff if that's what you believe is best for your child. And
and with that said, Brian, I know, again, maybe not every state, so this is going to have to do, you're going to do some of your research, but a lot of these states have these like curriculum frameworks where they call them access points, right? Where they will be able to educate your child in the general education classroom at their learning level. A lot of the states, I don't know, what Arkansas has, but a lot of them have that already figured out. In the last couple of years, they've done that because of the IDA. So, get to know that and see if your state has those access points or curriculum frameworks. It's a guideline, obviously, that doesn't modify the work. It just helps it so that it's accessible at your child's learning level.
Absolutely. So yeah, hopefully, as we're talking, you parents are getting ideas. They're feeling a little bit more empowered to speak up in the classroom or in the IEP meeting. And if you're sitting here going, because we've been done with school, we got done last week, and so, some districts, I know some states let out in May, some let out in June. But if you're kind of feeling like, oh, we already had our child's IEP, and they've already made these decisions, you can call an IEP meeting at any point. Because you are an equal team member of the IEP team. And so if you go to a training over the summer, if you go to a workshop, if you have a conversation with your neighbor or someone in the local Down Syndrome Association, and you start to see things differently and start to realize it could be different, or that you want it to be different, you can call an IEP meeting and say, hey, I would like to meet before school starts in August or September, whenever you meet or whenever your school starts. And you can have another IEP meeting and talk about what that looks like. Don't be afraid to do that, because if you don't, no one else is going to.
Well, I agree with you, but I am not sure you're going to get all the members of the IEP team.
In August, you would, because they would have, it wouldn't happen until the school year, or until their contracted time starts back.
Exactly. That's like, so if you're in July and you're like, maybe we have like a team chair. So, I would email that person, and they usually are pretty good at responding, but the comment back would be, we wouldn't be able to have that meeting until then. But the point is, come up with those questions, send those emails. But to Brian's point, whatever that contracted year starts, that's probably when you're going to get your meeting. So,
yeah, it would not happen until, so in this area, we start, I think my kids go back kind of mid-August.
Yeah.
So I think teachers, their contracted time is 4 or 5 days before the start of the school year.
Right.
So your meeting would not start until, until whenever the teachers are required to be back. But
and that probably even says that on the school calendar, right, Brian? Doesn't it normally even say that on the school calendar? Like, teachers are back here, students come back then?
Yeah. So you could be able to find out when that is. You just go on your local school district website and find out when what the calendar is. Yeah. So, but yeah, if you request an IEP meeting, they have to respond to that, and they have to legally set that up to have that meeting. They can't dismiss you and say, oh, well, we had a meeting back in May. We're not going to meet again until next May.
Yeah, no.
You can't be dismissed. You have to
Right.
have that meeting. We have a certain timeline in which that meeting has to happen. Now, summer, that the clock is not ticking because school is not in session.
Correct. Right.
So.
Right. I agree with you on that.
Yeah.
Well, we're almost to the end of our time, Brian. Is there anything else that you had on your notes to talk about?
I'm kind of looking around here. I can't think of anything. I can't think of anything that we haven't covered here.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I think we're good. Just, like I said, just to recap, have genuine conversations about placement. Where are we going to provide the services for the goals to be met? Remember, services are portable.
Mm-hmm.
Special education is portable. It is not a room down the hall.
Correct.
And so the services are supposed to be brought to your child, not the child to the services in most cases.
Mm-hmm.
So ask for the data. What data are they using to make decisions? And if the decisions are different than your team, or your decision is different than the team decision, you're not looking at the same data. And then talk about the supplementary aids and services. What are they using to ensure that your child's able to meet those goals? And if they suggest a different placement than you think, then ask what data do you have on the supplementary aids and services to show that it didn't work? I think that's it.
And they don't need to sign anything.
Oh, yeah.
I'm typing that right.
Right. You don't have to sign anything.
Need to sign anything.
Yeah, you have time to consider the proposal, and then also just go back to that backward planning. Think about what is the end goal. Mm-hmm. I remember a quote, I think it's from Alice in Wonderland, that says, "If you don't know where you're going, any path might get you there."
Yeah.
But then you get there and go, that's not really where I wanted to be. And so, backwards plan. Think about the future for your child. Think about your child at 22, 23, 24 years old, and ask yourself, what do we hope for him or her at that point, and how can we get there?
Yeah, and with that said, Brian, I'm going to do a little bit of research myself, and I will put that in the Facebook group here, or on our page. But as in any goals, whether it's business goal, you want those key words, those strong words that are action words, if you will. Like, absolutely. Let's not make them wishy-washy, loosey-goosey, and I don't mean that in a bad way, but you know what I mean? We want some actionable words so that they can look at this and say, okay, this parent wants this by this time. Now what do we need to, we need to have those action words. And I'll see if I can find something that, shows some really good parent vision statements and stuff that have those good words in it. But well, everyone, this has been an absolute pleasure for myself. Brian, I'm sure I can speak for you. I hope everyone does have an enjoyable summer. Get out, have some fun with your kids. Enjoy the summer as best you can. And then, like I said, we're going to regroup in August. And if you have any ideas for topics, let us know. If you come across any great speakers, share them with us. And I just want to say thank you, Brian, for joining me in this venture. I appreciate it. I think it's been awesome.
I have really enjoyed it, Marla. I've really enjoyed our partnership, and I think we're a good team. And I hope that, I do feel like we are changing the way people see Down syndrome, that it doesn't have to be the way it's always been. And so that's what we're about, changing the way people view Down syndrome. And that's why we are the Downright Capable Talk Show, because we want people to see our kids for their capabilities, not their disabilities. And I think we're doing
good job, Brian. All right, everyone. Happy summer. Enjoy it. Stay safe, and we'll see you back here in August. Take care, everyone.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Noah.